B'nei Shabbos nekabelo Oy lecha doini likras kala B'nei Shabbos nekabelo Oy lecha doini likras kala B'nei Shabbos nekabelo Oy lecha B'nei Shabbos nekabelo. Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. How are you? Of course, that was Rabbi Shlomo Katz singing his song. It's called Likras Shabbos. Normally, I don't play Shabbos songs until Friday, but I'm on a roll doing Shabbos songs on Fridays from the Moshav Band and their Kabbalah Shabbos album. So today I found myself humming this Shlomo Katz tune, and I thought I'd play it for you. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? It's great to be with you. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we get it going on a fine, Wednesday? Of course we can wish each other a good Shabbos. It's already Wednesday. My goodness, the week is already halfway done. Melissa says shalom from Great Neck, New York. Sharon in New Jersey. Paula in Chicago. Stephen in New Hampshire. James in Indy. John in Sedona. Allison in Fayetteville. Christo, good evening from a frigid Lubbock, Texas. Thankful to still have power and running water. Amen. We are praying for everybody in the middle of the country. We're seeing these images in the news. It's crazy that it's so cold and that the state, we really feel for you. I mean, the people without power in this kind of weather, please God, may you all be spared from any harm. And we say amen. Bill, shalom from Holy Hill in Berkeley, California. So good to be home. It's been fun tracking your journey, Bill, all the way back from Arkansas. So glad to hear you've made it safely home. Tom says shalom chaverim. Randy in Florida. Paula in the Northwest. Harold and Loretta, not in Oregon, but in Santa Cruz. Welcome to California. Aaron says shalom, Sally, Nina, and everyone. Paula wishing everybody many blessings. Renee in Indy. Michael in Scranton. Judy says shalom. Jason says shalom aleichem. PK is in Colorado. Crystal in Canada. Yehuda in South Carolina. Celia, I'm not sure what that says. Carol in Minneapolis. Paula is praying. And there's some good back and forth. Oh, Celia is in Miami. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you with us. And Gigi on the YouTube side in British Columbia. Before I go any further, I just wanted to share a little story. I mentioned this book the other day. Just a few weeks ago, we tragically lost Rabbi Avraham Twersky of blessed memory at the age of 90. I mean, he wrote so many books and touched so many lives. Not just a rabbi, but a doctor, psychiatrist, very prominent in his field as a doctor. But I mentioned this book, Living Each Day, where he has basically a piece of scripture and a piece of wisdom, some scripture and some commentary on scripture, and then something from the sages and some commentary or a Hasidic story based on that for every day of the year based on the Hebrew calendar. So today is the 5th of the Hebrew month of Adar. I guess now it's the 6th because it's evening here. But okay, I took the story from the 5th of Adar, which I was learning earlier when it was daytime. And it's such a classic and great story that just happened to fall out today. It's not like I might start reading this book again. I mean, it's really that good. Living Each Day, Rabbi Avraham Twersky. It's available on Amazon. It's been updated. My copy is covers the years from 1998 to 2003. Meaning they updated it just to adjust it for the modern calendar, in the year 2021. But Rabbi Twersky follows the Hebrew calendar. Anyway, his story for the 5th of Adar is about Zusha, the Hasidic master Zusha, who was known to be so humble. He was an incredibly gifted Torah scholar, but he was absolutely humble about his learning and about his greatness. He would never brag or presume to say anything to anybody. And he lived in pretty much abject poverty. And yet his teachings are absolute gold. One famous story of Zusha is he said, on the day of judgment, if the heavenly court will say to me, Zusha, why weren't you as great as Moses, or as great as the prophets, or as great as the sages of the Talmud, or as great as the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism? If they say that to me, said Zusha, I will not be intimidated. I won't have to answer. That's not a problem. But if they say to me, Zusha, why were you not Zusha? Woe unto me. And what he meant by that is that you don't have to compare yourself to any other person in this world. Every soul was sent into this world with a unique mission and unique abilities and unique assets and unique challenges to do their unique journey through life. So you never have to compare yourself to other people and say, did I do as much as him or her or whatever? But when you ask yourself, am I living up to my potential? Am I using all the tools and assets and resources that God gave me? Am I meeting the challenges and overcoming the obstacles that God set in my way so that I could learn from them and do more and share more with other people and serve humanity better, etc.? Am I living up to my potential? That's a question we have to ask ourselves every day and be as humble as Zusha and basically say, we're never living up to our potential fully. We could always do a little bit better. And in order to do better, you got to ask yourself every day, who am I? Who am I really? What am I? What was I sent here to do? To ask that question is to begin to get an answer and to begin to grow in wisdom on that question. All right. Let's get into it. Where are we holding today? Why don't you step back here, Morgan? This is Morgan. She's a very fine photographer, and she's taking some pictures of Nina and me for AARP magazine. I started getting AARP when I turned 50, and I suspect that some of you out there may have received AARP magazine also. So hopefully Morgan will have some nice pictures and a little write-up about the AT community in that magazine. Thanks so much for being here, Morgan. All right. Okay, so where are we holding? This is Daf Peches, page 88 here in Tractate Pesachim, the laws of Passover, the fourth volume of the Talmud. We are in chapter 8. Today we're completing our discussion of the first Mishna in chapter 8 and opening our discussion of the second Mishna. We're actually going to start our reading today at the bottom of page 87 on the B side, about 3 paragraphs from the bottom. Rabbi Chia teaches, what is the meaning of that which is written? God understands its ways and he knows its place. That's from Job 28:23 in Hebrew Eov. So the Holy One, blessed be he, knows the Jewish people. So we've been talking, we had a bunch of teachings yesterday where we were breaking down Hosea and what the prophet Hosea was talking about and the lesson that he learned. The Holy One said to Hosea, the Jewish people are sinning, and Hosea didn't stand up for the Jewish people. And so the Holy One, blessed be he, taught the prophet Hosea a lesson through his own personal life. And we should all draw lessons from our own personal lives. As I'm always saying, though I maybe haven't been saying it lately, God, unless we're prophets, God doesn't speak to us in the language of words. But if we're human, then God is always speaking to us in the language of events. And just like I was talking about with Zusha before, you have to ask yourself, what is God saying to me via the events in my life, in my family's life, in my community's life, in my nation's life, etc. So now that we're talking about the nation and certain teachings that are scripturally based, we move on here near the end of this page. And we have this idea, we started it yesterday, of why are the Jewish people in diaspora, right? Where were the Jewish people exiled from their land? We lost the right to live in the ancient land of Israel because we did not live up to our end of the covenant. But then what happened to us? God could have just destroyed the Jewish people, but he said he never would. So there's a covenant between God and the Jewish people. And we've seen 2,000 years later, despite being scattered all over the world, the most vulnerable, the smallest and weakest of nations, hey, we're still here. So what the sages are seeing in that course of events is that even though we've suffered horribly, and in every generation, right, there have been nations that rise up to destroy us, nevertheless, though the Jewish people suffer, we're still here. Somehow we survive. So the places where the Jewish people have been sent to live around the world, seemingly by fate, seemingly individual choices, communities form here, communities form there. After the Holocaust, there was a big Jewish community in Shanghai. I think the Shanghai Jewish community is probably smaller now than it was. There was a huge Jewish community in Argentina. That community has shrunk a little bit from its heyday, etc. These Jewish populations sort of rise and fall in all these nations. But according to the sages, God is watching over us in all of those places. And he has sent us there for specific reasons, right? For our safety, so that we won't be eradicated, so that we can keep learning Torah in some cases. And we had Rabbi Lazar's teaching yesterday that one of the reasons that the Jewish people are in diaspora around the world is so that non-Jews would come into contact with the Jewish people and hear about the one God, and in some cases even join the Jewish people. So we're continuing that string of teachings, and now Rabbi Chia is looking at this verse from Job, where it says that God understands its ways and he knows its place, meaning the Jewish nation. So the Holy One, blessed be he, knows where the Jewish people who are unable to withstand the harsh decrees of the Romans. Therefore, he exiled them to Babylonia, right? It went very bad, very, very bad in the Holy Land at the hands of the Romans. They destroyed the temple, and it's never been rebuilt since, right in about the year either 69 or 70. And about 65 years after that, in the year 135, there was the horrific rebellion against Rome, the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which ended, with something like 1 million Jews killed, the land destroyed, the forest burned, Jerusalem leveled. Terrible, terrible outcome for the Jews. So Rabbi Chia is here saying, but God made sure that there was another community of Jews who had been around for a long time, since the destruction of the first temple, in Babylonia. And that community was safe from the depredations of the Romans. Therefore, he exiled them to Babylonia, whose people are less cruel than the Romans. And Rabbi Lazar said, the Holy One, blessed be he, exiled Israel to Babylonia only due to the fact that it is a land as deep as the netherworld, i.e., it is a land of plains and valleys, which alludes to that which is stated in Hosea, I shall ransom them from the power of the netherworld. I shall redeem them from death. So now we're starting to talk about, and we'll be talking about today, this idea that there will be the ingathering of exiles. In other words, eventually there will be a Messiah who is a human, not a God, who is going to be sent by God to say, a new time has come on earth. That'll be the end of war, the end of famine, etc. And at that time, the Jewish people will be brought back to Israel. That exile will end, and we will come back in peace and joy to the Holy Land. So at that time, right, so Hosea is talking about in those days, I shall ransom them from the power of the netherworld, I shall redeem them from death. And about that, Rabbi Lazar is saying, well, yeah, Babylonia is a very low place, right? It's got a lot of valleys, a lot of deserts, the equivalent of Death Valley, perhaps. And so they're coming up from this low place. And we always talk about, and we'll discuss tonight, Ula, the sage Ula, who would travel between the Holy Land and Babylonia, the Jewish community in Bavel, And it was always said that he would descend to Bavel and he would ascend to Israel, ascend to the Holy Land. And, it's not really talking about north and south. It's somewhat talking about elevation, but not much. I mean, Jerusalem definitely is higher up than sea level, but really he's talking about going up in a spiritual level, right? That's what it means to ascend there. Okay. Rabbi Hanina said, it is due to the fact that their language, this is another reason why God created it, made sure that there was a Jewish community in Babylonia, not only in Israel. Rabbi Hanina said, it is due to the fact that their language in Babylonia, which is part of the Persian Empire, but the lingua franca there, the common language that was spoken, was Aramaic. And that Aramaic is similar to the language of the Torah, which enables the Jews who live there to study Torah, right? The Talmud is written in Aramaic. Somebody who's a very, talented Hebrew speaker, much more talented than I, can make his way pretty well through an Aramaic text because it uses the same letters and the words have very similar roots. There's differences for sure, but there's a lot of similarities. So says Rabbi Hanina, if they're speaking Aramaic and they're using the same alphabet, it's going to be easier for them to spend time studying Torah in such a community as opposed to living in Rome and speaking Latin, etc. Rabbi Yochanan said, it is due to the fact that he sent them to their mother's house, i.e. the birthplace of the forefathers of the Jewish people who lived in Aram Naharaim, which is in Babylonia, right? So Avraham, where did he come from, right? Aram, right? So it's like the place where, when it said about Abraham, leave your father's house and go to the land that I will show you, he was coming from that part of the world. And so when the Jewish people were sent out of the Holy Land, where were they sent to? The place where they came from, right? So in a sense, they were sent back to their mother's house. And this is expressed in the statement of Rabbi Alexandri, who said, and don't be surprised that there's a rabbi named Alexandri, right? Named after Alexander. Alexander, the great, right? The Greek conqueror was actually good to the Jewish people. And there are definitely Jews whose Hebrew name is Alexander or Alexandri. It's surprising, but it is so. It is just so. Okay, and this is expressed in the statement of Rabbi Alexandri, who said there are three that return to their points of origin, and these are they: the Jewish people, the money of Egypt, and the writing on the tablets of the covenant. The Jewish people, what we just said, right? When they were kicked out of the Holy Land, many of them ended up back in Babylonia, which is where they had come from. The money of Egypt, as it is written, and it came to pass in the 5th year of King, I want to pronounce this right. Rechavam, right? Rechavam, right? So King Rechavam, that Shishak, the king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem, and he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took everything. So this is referring to the idea that when the Jews were enslaved in Egypt, and then God redeemed us with an strong hand and an outstretched arm, and 10 plagues, and the splitting of the sea, etc. But when we left Egypt, the Egyptians said, go, get out of here, please. It's enough with the plagues, especially the 10th plague when the slaying of the firstborn. And at that time, they sent the Jews away and they said, here, take. And they gave them silver and gold, which basically is payment for all those years that the Jews had been enslaved, right? It was reparations for slavery. And yet that money ended up all going back to Egypt because of this pharaoh, this king Shishak of Egypt, eventually attacked successfully the kingdom of Israel, came up against Jerusalem, and took back so much of that wealth. That's detailed in First Book of Kings 14, 25, and 26. And one more thing, according to Rabbi Alexandri, that went back to where it came from was the writing on the tablets of the covenant, right? The 10 Commandments were written on these stone tablets. As it is written in Deuteronomy 9:17, Moses speaking, and I took hold of the 2 tablets and cast them out of my 2 hands and broke them before your eyes. Deuteronomy 9:17. And it was taught in the Tosefta, the tablets were broken and the letters are flying and returning to their point of origin, right? The letters of the Ten Commandments, that first set of tablets, which was smashed by Moses, right? It's not just like the tablets fell apart and the letters whatever. The letters were of divine origin. In fact, they went, like a circular letter, like a mem, the Hebrew letter mem, when it was in the Ten Commandments, that centerpiece, right? If you made a circular letter that's a full circle, the centerpiece would just fall out. But because they were of divine origin, that centerpiece just miraculously hung in the air within that stone tablet. So these letters were of divine origin, and they remained divine property, as it were. And so when Moses smashed that first set of tablets, in the incident of the golden calf, we have this tradition that the letters themselves flew back to God's precinct. Ulla, the sage Ulla, who was very important for bringing teachings from the sages who were working and teaching in the Holy Land in Israel, bringing their teachings down to the Jewish community in Babylonia and coming and returning with questions and even with teachings, because it was very advanced Torah community there in Bavel. And so he was the one who was sort of bringing teachings back and forth between the two communities. Ulla said that Israel was exiled to Babylonia in order to enable them to eat the dates that grow there plentifully, which gave them strength and allowed them to engage in Torah study. So that's Rav Steinsaltz elucidating, but the way it actually says it in the Talmud is, Ulla said Babylonia in order that Israel should eat dates and engage in Torah. So why was the Jewish community in Babylonia? Why was part of Israel exiled to Babylonia? So they could eat dates and study Torah. What does he mean by that? So the Gemara records a related incident. Ulla visited Pumbedisa, and his hosts brought him a basket of dates. And he said to them, "How many baskets of dates like this can one purchase for a zuz?" It's a unit of money. And they said to him, "One can purchase 3 baskets for a zuz." And he said, "How can it be possible to purchase a basket full of honey, date honey, for just a single zuz? And yet the Babylonians do not engage in Torah study more extensively?" Right? Food is so cheap here. Delicacies like date honey are so cheap here in Babylonia that you guys should be studying Torah all day long. Everything is so inexpensive. You don't have to work hard. You don't have to work long hours. You should just work a little bit in the morning and then study Torah all day, because you can earn a living with so little work, based on the fact that a basket of dates is so cheap. That night, the dates that Ulla ate afflicted him, and he suffered from indigestion. In light of this, Ulla retracted his original assessment of the Babylonians, and he instead praised them and said, "A basket full of lethal poison, i.e. dates that cause indigestion, sells for a zuz in Babylonia, and despite the fact that they suffer from its effects, the Babylonians still engage in Torah study. What an admirable people." It really depends on what's happened to you lately. And, Ulla is incredibly respected, right? Like Rav Yehuda sent his son to learn from Ulla, to study practical halachas from Ulla. So Ulla is a really great and respected sage. And yet, just based on kind of like what's going on with his stomach, he passes judgment, first condemning and then praising an entire, population of the Jews in Babylonia. And I think it's a good little, cautionary tale, illustrative tale. We're all like that, right? We're all like that. We are very quick to judge, usually negatively, but even positively, based on just the last thing we heard or felt. And we should be a little bit more cautious in passing judgment, whether for good or for bad, on whole communities based on just little incidents and facts. I think that the editors of the Talmud, Ravina and Rav Ashi, were actually being a little bit humorous, but very human, right, in including this story and showing how Ula flip-flopped on that. And I think probably Ula was even being a little bit self-effacing and self-deprecating and funny when he, sort of allowed that story to be told, right? He shared these views so that it became a story that could be set down in the Talmud. And I think he would have also agreed that, you got to be a little careful. Nevertheless, there's this underlying truth, right? It's all about what do you prioritize in life, right? So if you prioritize Torah study, then you shouldn't spend a lot of time making a lot of money to live in a big house. You should just meet your needs and then spend the rest of your time in Torah study. That is how Ula prioritizes his minutes and hours in this world. The Gemara returns to its discussion of prophecies of consolation that are related to those in the book of Hosea. And Rabbi Elazar said, "What is the meaning of that which is written? And many peoples shall go and say, Go, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths." That's Isaiah chapter 2, verse 3. And the Gemara notes that Jacob is the only patriarch mentioned and asks, is he the God of Jacob and not the God of Abraham or Isaac? Right? So why is it that the prophet Isaiah, in talking about, and he's talking a little bit about that future time, right? That messianic time, when many people shall go and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob." He's talking about the future time when everyone will sort of flow there, right? In the messianic age. Jerusalem will be the center of the world, is what our tradition teaches. But it should be noted that even when the temple was standing, it was not only Jews who were bringing offerings there. There were pilgrims from other traditions and religions and countries who came and brought offerings in the temple. And Sukkot, the fall holiday, is understood to be a holiday that is universal in nature. When there were 70 offerings brought representing the 70 nations of the world. So there was definitely, this kind of, it was a common practice, an invitation that people could bring offerings to the temple in Jerusalem. It was not only for Jews. But at any rate, why would Isaiah say that the people at that time will say, "Let us go to the house of the God of Jacob"? What about Abraham and Isaac? So rather, the verse specifically mentions Jacob to allude to the fact that the temple will ultimately be described in the same way that Jacob himself referred to it. So we have a tradition that in the Bible, when that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were all there. The temple had not been built. Even really Jerusalem wasn't there. But what eventually became the Temple Mount was the place where, for example, the Akedah happened, right? When God tested Abraham and told him to take his son up on a mountain that, I, the Lord, will show you, and sacrifice him there as an elevation offering. That happened at the spot that would eventually be the Temple Mount, right? So Abraham and Isaac visited this same location, but how did they refer to it? So it will not be in the future when the temple is there and people flow, to Jerusalem to be part of the offerings brought at the temple. They will not refer to it as it was referred to by Abraham, because it is written of him that when he prayed at the location of the Temple Mountain, he called it Mount. As it is stated, Genesis 22:14, as it is said on this day, on the mount where the Lord is seen. And it will not be referred to as it was referred to by Isaac, for it is written of him that he called the location of the temple field. He called it a field when he prayed there, as it is stated, and Isaac went out to meditate in the field. And our tradition says that when he did that, he was standing on the Temple Mount. Rather, it will be described as it was referred to by Jacob, who called it house. as it is stated, Genesis 28:19, and he called the name of that place Bethel, right? Bethel, house of the Lord. Rabbi Yochanan said, the day of the ingathering of exiles is as great as the day on which heaven and earth were created. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that when the Messiah comes and all the exiles, all the Jewish people exiled all over the world in a diaspora will return to the Holy Land, return to Jerusalem, and the Holy Land and Jerusalem itself will miraculously grow to accommodate everybody, all the living Jews at that time, and all the Jews of all time who will be resurrected, right? We believe in resurrection of the dead at the time of the Messiah's coming. Rabbi Yochanan says, the day of the ingathering of exiles is as great as the day on which heaven and earth were created. And this is derived by means of a verbal analogy between the word day in these two contexts, as it is stated concerning the ingathering of exiles in Hosea 2:2, and the children of Judea and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint themselves one head, and shall go up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. That's Hosea 2:2. And it is written in the narrative of the creation, and there was evening and there was morning, one day, right? At the end of the creation of the first day, when God said, let there be light, at the end of the creating on that day, it said, and there was evening and there was morning, one day, right? And so this use of the word day in these two contexts, Rabbi Yochanan learns out from that the day of the ingathering of exiles will be comparable to a day of creation. Obviously, this is a very ethnocentric teaching in the sense that the sages believe that why was the world created? It was created to be a place where Torah would be learned. And when the Messiah comes, that'll be an incredible day. It will be as fundamental a shift in worldwide consciousness, as happened in the past when humans were, developed and came into the world. That was a major shift from when before there were humans. But once, the Messiah comes, so then what do we learn? That the world will be as filled with knowledge of the Lord as the sea is filled with water, right? Meaning that on that day, God's presence will no longer be hidden in this world. And we'll understand what this world is really about. And all of us will be able to experience the presence of the Lord, similar to the way that the angels experience the presence of the Lord now. We won't, even then, we won't be able to grasp the infinitude of the Lord. Of course not. But his presence will be constantly revealed, and we'll understand what all of the apparent injustice and evil in the world and all the suffering that has taken place in world history. We'll have a much better understanding of why all those things happen once God's presence is openly revealed in the world. That's what we long for when we say we long for the coming of Mashiach. In the meantime, God's presence is hidden, at least as an overt manifestation, and we have to use our sechel to look for God's presence in this world. We have to use our inner eye, our intelligence, our Torah knowledge, our study, our faith to see God's presence in the world. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead now to the end of the discussion of that first Mishna in chapter 8. Remember, what the Mishna was actually about, and this whole chapter is who can register. How do you become included in a group of people registered to eat a particular Paschal lamb, a particular Passover offering? They all have to agree in advance that they're going to be part of a group that is going to fulfill its obligation to eat a piece of the Passover lamb or the Passover goat. Of course, it's only brought when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. But the fact is, the law says they can only eat of it if they have registered in advance to be part of a group that's going to be eating that particular offering. And this chapter is all about the nuances of that law. We learned in the Mishnah, one who is half slave and half free may not eat from his master's Paschal lamb. It is specifically from his master's lamb that he may not eat. However, from his own lamb, he may eat. But isn't there a contradiction? wasn't it taught in a baraisa that he may eat neither from his own nor from his master's paschal lamb? So we discussed this yesterday. How could it happen that a person was half slave and half free? Remember that one of the ways that you could become a slave, you could be a free person who, fell into grave debt, and in order to pay off the debt, submitted to become a slave for a fixed amount of time, 7 years, sort of contributing his wages to the person he owes money to. But then at the end of that time, he goes out of slavery. While he's a slave, a few things could happen. One thing is that a slave could be jointly owned by two masters, and perhaps one of the masters relinquishes his ownership of the slave and says, I free you, or leaves it in his will, or just does it, whatever. For whatever reason, one of the masters frees his slave. But the other master hasn't done that. So that would create a person who is half slave and half free. Or perhaps he's owned by one master, but his master is allowing him to pay off, that debt. And so he's buying himself free, as it were, and he's halfway done. So he's half slave and half free. So the Gemara answers that this is not difficult. What does he do in terms of the paschal lamb? Because a slave who's fully owned has to be part of his master's lamb. He doesn't have an independent legal existence in the biblical notion of slavery as it existed thousands of years ago. So the Gemara answers that this is not difficult. Here, the baraisa that rules that the half-slave may partake neither of his own nor of his master's lamb is in accordance with the original version of the Mishna, which cites Beit Hillel's opinion that the master retains his rights to the half-slave. And as we'll see, Beis Hillel, over time, they had many debates with Beis Shammai. The followers of Shammai had debates with the followers of Hillel. Usually the law follows Beis Hillel. But in a few matters, Beis Shammai were correct, and Beis Hillel conceded that Beis Shammai were correct. And this is one of them. And let's just read it, how it works. So there, the Mishnah that allows the half-slave to partake of his own lamb is in accordance with the ultimate version of the Mishnah, which cites Beis Hillel's revised opinion after they conceded to Beis Shammai, according to which the status of the half-slave is altered such that he is considered like a free man as pertains to his inclusion in a group for eating the paschal lamb. As we learned in a Mishnah, one who is half-slave and half-free serves his master one day and himself one day. This is the statement of Beis Hillel, right? So when a person is half slave and half free, so he shouldn't have to, act like a slave every day. So in what way is the fact that he's half free expressed? So Beis Hillel said, well, every other day he's a slave, and the day in between he's free. So that might be one way to do it. That's how Beis Hillel said. But Beis Shammai say, no, that's a terrible solution. It's a terrible solution. It might be, it's almost like, if parents, God forbid, divorce, and now they're going to share custody of their children. Maybe in some situations it works to, go back and forth, but that might not be so good for the kids. So, that's why usually it's more like half the week in one place, half in the other, or weekends and weekdays, or, some kind of a arrangement that makes sense. And this one day on, one day off of slavery did not make sense. Why? Says Beis Shammai, well, you have remedied the situation of his master, who benefits fully from all his rights to the slave, that he gets a slave working for him every other day. But for the slave himself, you have not remedied his situation. How so? He is not able to marry a female slave, since half of him is already free. And a free Jew may not marry a slave. And he is also not able to marry a free woman, since half of him is still a slave. And a Jewish woman may not marry a slave. And if you say he should be idle and not marry, but is it not true, according to Isaiah 45:18, that the world was created only for procreation? As it is stated, quote, he did not create it to be a waste. He formed it to be inhabited. right? It is expected that all the creatures will reproduce. In fact, we have the mitzvah, peru urevu, be fruitful and multiply. Now, that could have been cited here, but instead, it's the more far-reaching verse from Isaiah, which says that God did not create this world to be a wasteland. He wanted it populated by people, animals, plants, etc. He wants it to be like a rich garden. Rather, for the improvement of the world, we force his master to make him a free man, and the slave writes a bill accepting his responsibility to pay half his value to his master. This was the original version of the Mishna. The ultimate version of the Mishna records the retraction of Beis Hillel, and Beis Hillel retracted its position and ruled like Beis Shammai. Right? So to have a man who is half slave and half free, it's okay for the master. Okay, he gets a slave every other day. But it's no good for the slave because in that situation, he can't get married and have children. And the sages are going to create they're going to go out of their way. I mean, they're obviously not going to violate halakha, but they're going to go out of their way to create situations where people are not going to be restricted from having families. They want people to have families. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 8. Now we're going to open our discussion of Mishnah number 2. And there's actually a fair amount of the Gemara we're going to read, so I'm going to keep it moving. Mishnah number 2. In the case of one who says to his slave, "Go and slaughter the paschal offering on my behalf," but it does not specify which type of animal to slaughter, whether a lamb or a goat. Both have to be less than a year old, more than 8 days old, but either one is fit to be a Passover offering, either a young sheep or a young goat. So, if the slave slaughtered a kid, his master may eat it. If he slaughtered a lamb, his master may eat it. If the slave slaughtered both a kid and a lamb, his master should eat from the first one that was slaughtered. The second is invalid and should be burned. Remember that the whole key here is you can only eat from a paschal offering, a paschal lamb, that you were registered to in advance. So presumably you know before it's slaughtered what animal is going to be slaughtered for which group. Now that, in real practice, that can be a little bit, amorphous, a little bit ambiguous, because maybe a rich guy says, okay, go slaughter the paschal offering for me. And then the slave is going to, just pick up an animal. He's going to decide whether to take a lamb or a kid because the owner didn't specify. But what if the owner did specify, said, get a lamb for me, and then the slave forgot? Now it can become problematic. Or if the owner said, just slaughter for us, and the guy, brought 2 animals, and he wasn't sure what the owner wanted, that's the kind of situation that we're dealing with. If the master had stated explicitly which type of animal to slaughter, but the slave forgot what his master said to him, what should he do? He should slaughter both a lamb and a kid and say the following stipulation. If my master said to me that I should slaughter a kid, then this kid is for his paschal offering, and the lamb is for mine. And if my master said to me I should slaughter a lamb, then the lamb is for his paschal offering, and the kid is for mine. And in this way, once the master ultimately clarifies what he had originally said, both animals may be used accordingly. If his master also forgot what he said, then neither animal may be used, since it has not been clarified which of the animals the slave and the master are registered for. Therefore, both of them, the lamb and the kid, go out to the place designated for burning in accordance with the halacha, the law, pertaining to offerings that may not be eaten. However, despite this, both the master and the slave are exempt from observing the second Passover, Pesach Sheni, so long as the blood of the animals has already been applied to the altar before the master forgot which animal he specified to the slave that he should get. In other words, which animal he and his group were registered for. The Gemara. The Mishnah teaches that if the master did not specify which type of animal he wishes to use, he eats from whichever type the slave slaughters. Now, where we're headed very quickly with this is, we're talking about master and slave, but where we're going to get to is a king and a queen asking their servants to get for them. And it's fascinating how the king and a queen have absolute power, but because they have so much power, we're actually able to make some assumptions on their behalf, and they have to submit to those assumptions that wouldn't apply to regular people. Very interesting and counterintuitive. That's where we're headed. So the Mishnah teaches that if a master did not specify which type of animal he wishes to use, he eats from whichever type the slave slaughters. That's going to be similar to the king and queen. The Gemara exclaims, "It is obvious. Since the master did not specify, he apparently does not have a preference. Therefore, whichever animal is used will be acceptable." The Gemara answers, "The Mishnah's ruling is necessary in the case where the slave slaughtered a kid. His master may eat it, even though the master is accustomed to eat lamb. Even though he's accustomed to do so, it is not presumed that he is particular to use only a lamb, since even though he's accustomed to eat lamb, the fact is he didn't say to his slave, get a lamb. Since he didn't say anything, he can't be all that particular, since he did not explicitly say so. Similarly, if the slave slaughtered a lamb, his master may eat it, even if he is accustomed to use a kid for his paschal offering." We learned in the Mishnah, if the slave slaughtered a kid and a lamb, his master should eat from the first one that the slave slaughtered. To allow for the possibility of eating from whichever one is slaughtered first, the master must have been registered to eat from either animal. The Gemara cites a Baraisa that appears to contradict this idea. Wasn't it taught one may not be registered for two paschal offerings at once? The Gemara answers, the Mishnah discusses a case of a king and queen and similar cases for those for whom food is supplied by slaves. They are content with whatever food is presented to them, right? King and queen, not particular about what kind of food they eat. Why are a king and queen not particular? Because they always eat food fit for a king and queen. That's why they're not particular. Everything that comes across the king and queen's table is beautiful, wonderful food, so they're not going to be so particular about it. They are content with whatever food is presented to them since all their food is of good quality. Such people have the intent to be registered with whichever animal their slaves select to slaughter first and only with that animal, right? A king and queen don't have to say, get me this particular animal. They say, just get for us. Get us a paschal offering. Understanding that because they're not, the slaves of the king and queen are not just any slaves, right? They're the top quality, smartest possible, best butlers and maids, as it were, the best slaves. And they're going to select well because they know they're selecting for the king and queen who have unlimited power. If they don't select well, it's not going to go well for them. So the king and queen can count on the fact that their slaves can choose for them because their slaves are going to choose well. But regular people, or I guess wealthy people who own slaves, but not kings and queens, they will be more particular because they can't just assume that the slave is going to come back with something great. And similarly, it was taught in a Baraisa, one may not register for two paschal offerings at once. And there was an incident involving a king and queen who said to their slaves, go and slaughter the paschal offering on our behalf. And they went out and slaughtered two paschal offerings on their behalf. They came and asked the king which one he wanted to eat. Right? So the slaves wanted the king to be able to choose. Maybe he wants lamb, maybe he wants goat. Let's just bring one of each and then the king can choose. But that's a problem, right? Because you have to be registered for one animal. You can't be registered for two animals. We've already seen that. So in letting the king choose, it was not good. It actually created a problem. The king, and this king was Agrippa the First, who was a righteous king. What did the king do? That's the title of today's show. Act like a king. Obey the queen. What did King Agrippa do? He said, do whatever the queen says. Right? He passed the buck. So where am I? The king and queen said to the slaves, go and slaughter the paschal offering on our behalf. They went out, they slaughtered two, right? So it must have been a lamb and a kid. They came and asked the king which one he wished to eat. He said to them, go and ask the queen. They came and asked the queen. She said to them, go and ask Rabban Gamliel, right? So she said, go ask the Nasi, go ask the chief rabbi. So go and ask Rabban Gamliel to rule which one should be used. She understood that there was a halachic problem now, and she wasn't fit to rule on it. So she said, well, bring in the chief rabbi. Let him tell us what we should do. They came and asked Rabban Gamliel. He said to them, a king and a queen who are easily accepting of whichever foods their slaves choose to present to them should eat from the first one that was slaughtered, since it is presumed they wish to be registered for any animal the slaves selected. Since the king and the queen allowed the slaves to select for them, the slaves had this intent, well, we'll bring both and let them choose because they made a mistake, but they still slaughtered one before the other. And so Rabban Gamliel's ruling was, well, whichever one was slaughtered first, that is the intent that the king and queen had, because they said, let the slaves choose for us. But other people aren't like that. They are more particular. So you can't just say whichever one was slaughtered first. So says Rabban Gamliel, but we, the general population, who have limited supplies of food, and so we're particular about what food is served to us, would not eat from the first or from the second, since it is not permitted to be registered for 2 paschal lambs at once. So if you weren't specific and then your servant went and slaughtered 2, thinking that he would do you a favor and come back and say, okay, choose which one you want to eat, it actually would become a problem, because we gave him authority to slaughter for us and he slaughtered 2 on our behalf, and now the owner is registered to 2 lambs, and you can't be registered to 2 lambs. So now this person will not have fulfilled his obligation at the first Passover and will have to come again a month later for Pesach Sheni. And another time, there was a similar incident involving the king, the queen, and Rabban Gamliel. So this is not really about the Paschal lamb, but it's a very colorful little incident, so we're going to have it. So it happened that a dead lizard was found in the kitchen of the royal house. Now, since a lizard is one of the creeping animals whose carcasses impart ritual impurity, tuma, upon contact, they wanted to pronounce the entire meal tameh, ritually impure. They came and asked the king. He said to them, go ask the queen. They went to the queen. She said, go ask Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel came in. They came and asked him and said, this dead lizard was found in the kitchen. Does this render the entire meal tameh and not fit for eating? And he said to them, is the kitchen boiling hot or cold, right? Is the actual kitchen itself, the air in the kitchen, is it super hot or is it cool? And they said to him, oh, it is boiling hot. He said to them, go and pour a cup of cold liquid upon the lizard. They went and poured a cup of cold liquid on it, and the lizard quivered, demonstrating that it was still alive. That being the case, Rabban Gamliel pronounced the entire meal to be tahor, ritually pure, as a live lizard does not impart tuma. Only the carcass of the dead lizard would have imparted the tuma onto the meal. And the Gemara comments on this story. It turns out that the king, and now I'm finished, so if you have comments and questions, I'm coming to that. But the Gemara comments on this story of the lizard. It turns out that the king is dependent on the queen, and it turns out that the queen is dependent on Rabban Gamliel. And so it turns out that the entire royal meal is dependent on Rabban Gamliel. Okay, let's see what comments or questions may be here. Okay, here's a few questions. Tom, we are a touchstone. You can tell a lot about a country and its people by how they treat their Jews. Very good. And I would extend that and say you can tell a lot about a country by the way it treats its most vulnerable members, right? And so, a small Jewish population that has historically been the subject of so much anti-Semitism, exactly. And, the Spanish Empire was really one of the greatest empires in the world. And then they kicked out all the Jews and, the Spanish Empire didn't last so much longer. And you can see that about many, empires over time that sought to destroy the Jews. Now the Jews are still here and those empires have fallen. But it can also extend that teaching. The way a society treats its most vulnerable members says a lot about that society. Christo, I can read some Aramaic, but my Hebrew skills are much better, right? They're similar, but they're not the same language. Sharon, and you can get one little goat for two zuzayim, right? So Sharon is referencing the song that we sing at Passover about the goat that my father bought for two zuzayim. It's a funny, so it's a goat. It's like the Passover offering that my father brought home. But then, a series of calamities happen. And it's a fun little song that we sing at Passover. Alex, I have to tell you, loved hearing about the Hebrew name Alexander or Alexandri. My Hebrew name is Miriam Alexandra. I had never heard a Hebrew Alex before, and this makes me very happy. And I'll share something with you, Alex. My middle name is Alejandro, named after an uncle. My Hebrew name is not Alexander, but yeah, there's definitely Jews named Alex, and I went by Alex for many years. When I first moved to this country, I was an immigrant kid from South America, wanted to fit in a little bit better, thought Alex sounded more American than Salvador, so I identify. Okay. And finally, Lynn in North Texas says, surviving the great utilities disaster. Power cycled on so I could jump on just now. God bless you for being there. Wow, right? Because Lynn, I always see Lynn at the beginning of the show tuning in. She couldn't tune in because the power was out in Texas. Oh my God, please, God, these power outages should pass. The temperature should come up. And these whole populations that are endangered should move out of danger. We say amen. Great to see you here, Lynn. Great to see you all, my holy sisters and brothers. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, same regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for page 89 here in Tractate Pesachim. All the best. Have a good night.